Let's go South. Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom. I feel like nobody talks about the NFC South, Grossi, and today we are going to talk about the NFC South. If you're brand new or haven't caught the previous episodes, the way that this works is I'll break down every team, talk a little bit about what they did maybe last season or during the off season. I will then go through some of their opponents. I will give you what I think their floor will be and what their ceiling will be, and then rank them all at the end and where I think the standings will shake out for the division. But to the point that I just made, the NFC South right now, just the national media doesn't care. Let's be very honest. They got the first overall pick. They got the freaking Panthers over there with Bryce Young, and it just seems like it's still very underwhelming. The Saints, for example, they made some big moves in the offseason. They are the favorites to win that division, but ever since Tom Brady left and before that Drew Brees left, it just seems like there isn't a focus on any of these teams whatsoever. Yeah, you got guys like Bijan Robinson, and the Falcons will get their moment in the sun. The Panthers, of course, with Bryce, but it just seems like there's a whole lot of meh that's going on. But I think the interesting thing, and what the media is not really focusing on, is that there could be some contenders from this division, and you could even have multiple teams make the postseason. The reason being is because, again, as I've been saying in the past two videos, this conference, the NFC, is super duper weak this year, and you might have a team like the Falcons or the Panthers surprise people. Hell, maybe even Baker Mayfield is going to have a career renaissance there in Tampa. I don't think so, but he's got some pretty good weapons. But overall, I think it's just a little, I don't want to say disingenuous, but I just feel like it's a little crappy, the fact that the South does not get as much publicity as they should, because I think there are some decent football teams here that are building up to be potential contenders if their QB situation works out. And so let's get started with talking about the New Orleans Saints. The Saints are obviously favored to win this division. They went and got Derek Carr in the offseason, a big offseason acquisition, because boy, oh boy, did they need a quarterback. And the Saints, let's just be very honest here, they're not a really fun football team to watch last year. I know, I watched a lot of their games, and ever since Drew Brees left, it's kind of like, all right, who's going to work? Is it Taysom Hill? Is it Jameis Winston? Is it Andy Dalton? But let's be honest, the offense wasn't fun. Michael Thomas was out, but I will say there was flashes. Chris Olave was a monster last year for a time, and he was just so much fun to watch on that offense. That defense, especially in the later half of the season, was very, very good, and I think heading into this season, they are the foregone conclusion to win this division, but maybe they could go a bit further depending on how Carr performs. Throw on top of that Alvin Kamara, who somehow, someway only got a 3-game suspension for what he did.
I think I might have someone who's going to circumvent the law.
But during that 3-game absence, they're going to have Jamal Williams, who was a beast last year, especially on the goal line, put up insane touchdown numbers, and I think he'll be able to carry the weight until Alvin Kamara returns. Now, taking a look at their schedule, they're obviously in a bit of an easier division, but they are going to play some tough teams. The Vikings, who are basically their arch nemesis, besides the Packers hating the Vikings. I think the Saints might hate them just as much. They're going to be a little bit tough. The Giants could give them some issues. The Lions, the Jaguars, and hey, maybe even the Packers. Please, God, it's before Kamara comes back. Just give me this. But overall, their schedule isn't the worst. The teams that they're going against are not world enders. And so because of that, and because of their strength of their defense, and hell, even maybe Michael Thomas returning to form, I have their floor at 9-8, and I have their ceiling at 11-6. Because I think they'll be a good football team. I think, again, that defense is going to carry them a lot. And even though there's probably going to be some growing pains with that offense, I think they do have some great skill players. Jamal Williams is phenomenal for that locker room, and I think that he is going to make a big impact this year. Kamara, who's been a little bit quieter since Drew Brees left, maybe this is the year that he performs well. I know there's a lot of questions about Dennis Allen and his coaching ability, but at the end of the day, I think that this is the team to win this division, and they should have a winning record either way. Then you got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Well, Bucs fans, you had a time. You won a ring. That's what's important. And now it's back to rebuild mode. And the Buccaneers, again, they have some good players on the squad. They are rolling with Baker Mayfield. You have Kyle Trask waiting in the wings, and I don't know. It's just a weird team. Is their defense going to be good? There's some question marks there. Their offense, of course, losing Ryan Jensen is a big blow. They lost already some of their offensive linemen from previous years. And I just think that this is a rebuilding team, but it also is an opportunity for Baker Mayfield to kind of say, hey, I'm still here. And I imagine this is how he's talking in the locker room.
Say yes, chef.
Yes, chef.
Say yes, chef. I'm so tough.
Yes, chef. I'm so tough.
Say yes, chef. I'm so tough.
Yes, chef. I'm so tough.
And similar to the Saints, they don't have the worst schedule, but because they won the division last year, it's a little bit more difficult because they are going up against teams like the Bills, the 49ers, the Jaguars, the Titans, the Lions, and of course, the Eagles. So they have a tougher schedule. And so with all those question marks, even though they have guys like Godwin and Mike Evans, I do wonder how good they're actually going to be. So I have their floor a bit lower at 5-12. That's if everything goes wrong. I don't think they will be that bad, but I think they're going to have some competition against the Falcons and the Panthers. And I have their ceiling around 7-10. Now, again, this could all change if Baker Mayfield just goes out there and plays lights out. He played well during the preseason. He earned that starting job. Can that translate to the regular season and for a full season? We're going to find out. Then you got the home of the #1 overall pick from this last draft. You got the Carolina Panthers. Now, the Panthers are a bit of a sleeper team here. There are some concerns about Bryce Young. Yeah, obviously, he's a little bit smaller, though I imagine the Panthers will find a workaround, and this is how they might score the entire time this year.
Take me there.
But Bryce Young is a really smart guy. He was the most NFL-ready QB out of this past draft. And I think with the mix of the new coach, a good defense, looking at you, Brian Burns, they might be able to surprise some people, and they can also lean on the run. Now, there's a lot of question marks similar to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but they didn't win the division. So because of that, they get a little bit of a reprieve with their schedule. Of course, you have all their divisional opponents, and you have teams like the Seahawks, the Lions, the Jaguars, the Cowboys are going to be a tough team, and maybe teams like the Vikings. But overall, I think there's some high hopes for the Panthers. I have their floor at around 7-10, just because I believe in that coaching staff a bit more than the Buccaneers. And even though it's a rookie QB, I think that they'll lean on the run if they need to support Bryce Young until he's ready to take that next step. And I actually have their ceiling at 10-7 because their schedule is a little bit of a cakewalk. Now, I think for them to go 10-7, everything is going to have to go right. They're going to have a really good rush game, and Bryce Young is going to have to get better sooner rather than later. And that defense needs to be pretty much locked down. I think they have some of the pieces that they could do it. They are in the weaker division, but that's where I have the Panthers this season. And finally, you got the Atlanta Falcons. Another team where a lot of question marks, especially at QB. Desmond Ridder, earlier in camp, you saw him and didn't really make some great throws, and then you didn't really see him a ton during the preseason. So there's some question marks if Ridder is going to be that guy. I am a little concerned about the offensive line, but I'm more concerned about the pass rush and that defense. It just feels like that Falcons defense always has flashes every year, and they win just enough games to not be a top 3 overall pick. But they went out and got Bijan Robinson when they already had Algier and they had Cordarrelle Patterson. So I imagine this is going to be the entire Falcons offense this year.
You're running for women's rights.
Or for the environment. Or for animals.
They just couldn't believe that somebody would do all that running for no particular reason.
But they're in another situation where they didn't win the division, even though they could have last year. And because of that, they don't have a rough schedule like the Buccaneers do. Yes, they are going to be playing against teams like the Jets, which is going to be a little bit rough, and the Jaguars, similar to everybody else in the division. But I think that ground game should be phenomenal. There's a ton of hype behind Bijan Robinson. They have some good receivers. Are they actually going to throw to Kyle Pitts? That could be a game changer. So I actually have their floor at 7-10, just like the Panthers, and I also have their ceiling at 10-7. I think both of these teams are just flying under the radar and could surprise some people this year. And if the Falcons are able to establish that ground game early and Desmond Ridder is at least an adequate quarterback, they're going to win some games. And so looking at how this would shape out, going by their ceilings, you'd have the Saints at #1, then you'd have the Panthers and Falcons duking it out for #2 and #3, and you'd have the Buccaneers finishing last at 7-10. But as always, let me know what you think down in the comments below. You know, always find me at TomGrossiComedy.com or at TomGrossiComedy, all social media, see down below. Check out podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Music, Spotify, and of course, YouTube. And a big shout and thank you to all the patrons over patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy and the YouTube members. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.